So this is going to be part 2 of the last set of notes. In this video I'm going to talk about completing the square, which is another way of solving, or at least completing quadratic functions so they can be later solved. So if you again remember, the standard form of a quadratic function looks something like this, where the a, the b, the c can be any number, and they are coefficients that are in front of the x squared, in front of the middle term the x, and a number that's typically all by itself, which we call the c. They again can be any integer. They all have to be different for the most part, although not always. Sometimes they can be the same. If, for example, there's nothing in front of the x squared and there's nothing in front of the x, then you could assume that they're both ones. I'm not sure if that actually happens in math, but actually let's assume they're all always different, so I don't think you can have both a and b be the same number. Alright, regardless of that fact, sometimes we'll be presented with problems where you have the first two and you're missing the last. So you are going to be presented with a case where you're given the a, you're given the b, but you're missing the c. So c is just not there. So how can you find c if you have b? So if that last term is missing but the coefficient of the middle term is present, how can you find it? Well, through this formula. To find c, you take b, which is the coefficient in front of the middle term, you divide it by 2, and then you take the square of that all. And that will be your new c. So if the c is missing but you know what the b is, you can take that b, divide it by 2, and then take the square of that entire number, and you will get your c. So let's do a practical example of this. Alright, looking at this problem here, we don't really need the a for completing the square, but if you did, the a in this case is just the 1. The b is the 8, and the c is missing, or the term we're trying to find. So we are trying to find c over here. Well, how do we find c? Well, according to this formula here, all you have to do is you have to take the b, which is this, divided by 2, and then square it. So you take your 8, you divide it by 2, and then you square it. What is that going to give you? 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So that's now the missing c. So all you need to do is substitute it back in here, and you're done. X squared plus 8x plus 16. And you're essentially done with completing the square. Fairly simple. If you don't know c, use the b term, which will always be given to you, to find the c. Let's do another example. Alright, so once again we are given a quadratic function with the c term missing. So the c is just not there. We don't know what it is. Well, it's there, we just don't know what it is. So we're asked to find it. How do we find it? Well, we use the formula over here. If you don't have c but you have b, and we have b. b is whatever in front of the middle term, the x. In this case it's a negative 12. So we can take that negative 12, divided by 2, and then take the square of it all and see what we get. Well, negative 12 divided by 2, that's a negative 6. Negative 6 squared, so negative 6 times negative 6 is a positive 36. So now all I need to do is plug in my value for c, the 36, back in here, and I'll have my square completed. And that's about it. The only difficult part is sometimes the last term ends up as a fraction. So let me show you an example of that. So let's say you have a problem like this. Again, you are asked to find c. The c is missing. So you know the formula to find c. You take the coefficient in front of the middle term, the b. In this case, the b is a 3, right over here. So you take your 3, you divide it by 2, then you square it all. The 2 doesn't go into the 3 evenly, so you're going to get a fraction or a decimal. Now if you got a decimal here, it would be okay, but the better thing to do is to keep it as a fraction and then simply distribute this exponent to both numerator and denominator, which then equal out to a 3 squared over a 2 squared, which is 9 over 4. And just plug that fraction in there. So don't make it into a decimal. You could do that, but it just makes everything a little bit more difficult. And that's about it. So if it's a fraction, that still shouldn't scare you. It still works out the exact same way. Alright, so this was a video lesson for completing the square. There's going to be a part 3, one more video lesson for the last part of the last notes, which is going to be the quadratic formula, and that's coming up next.